So today I want to answer the question, what exactly is somatic writing? And most importantly, how can it help me write a better book? So, somatic writing, and lots of people use this term, but the name actually came to me on some land that I lived in East Nashville, some very magical land. And one day it was just like somatic writing. And I thought, well, I'll never be able to use that because surely someone has that domain. But when I went and checked, they didn't. And I realized it was mine because as a writing teacher, a decades long writing teacher, not in a proprietary way, I don't mean that, but it was mine on a soul level because I had been walking out through my own body and healing my own ancestral lineage and living on some very sacred land, all things that are connected to somatics. And I'd been a writing coach and teacher that entire time, decades long. So somatic writing to me is writing, first of all, in connection with our bodies, with land, with our ancestors, and being open to magic. Um, Somatic writing is an animist practice, and animism is the acknowledgement and the understanding that there's an aliveness to everything, that it's not just human consciousness, animal, plant consciousness that's alive, but that everything has a spirit and aliveness and is able to communicate if to us if we know how to listen. So first of all, connecting with the body, um, not just the body in a kind of general sense, but tuning in. What does your left eye have to say? What does your right ovary have to say? What does your liver have to say? What is your spleen? What story does your spleen have to tell? This is kind of how the practice of what I'd learned started to just come in, and I started to ask these questions and lead with these parts of our bodies, and things started to open up that went beyond, or perhaps beyond is the wrong word, but went to a different place and opened up different kinds of intelligence than simple free writes, which are wonderful, when you just grab a topic and go with it, don't stop to edit. But focusing it and asking very specific parts of our body or specific parts of our psyche or specific ancestors, calling them in, even if we didn't know their names, um, is how the practice really got going. But that's how it got going in terms of working with my students. And what immediately happened was there was this expansion in writers' voices, right? Because we're not just writing from the perspective of us as an individual with all the amazing stories we carry, but we're expanding our voice to listen to different aspects of ourselves through our bodies that has its own intelligence and its own stories, right? So there was an expansion in terms of writer's voice. Um, and the way the process really came to me wasn't through my mind either. It was really much more about my relationship with land and ancestors, particularly during a time in my life where I was so blessed to live on land in New Mexico that was on the road, um, one of the very sacred sites in New Mexico to the Tewa and Dine people, Black Mesa. I was able to somehow land there, like through some amazing grace, and lived on a dirt road at the foot of Black Mesa. one of the, as I said, most sacred places in the Americas and in New Mexico on Diné and Tewa land for the Tewa people, right by the San Ildefonso Pueblo, which is about 25 or so miles north of Santa Fe. And that was a period when I was asked or shown, or maybe it just happened to give up any humans as my teachers. And that particular land, there was certainly an agreement between us, but I feel that it was a kind of soul contract that I ended up on that land because the land became my teacher. And the land would get me out of bed every minute. I mean, every morning, walking on that dirt road. And the road itself became very alive to me. And there's an acequia, which is a way of um, watering irrigation system that came from Spain when New Mexico was colonized by the Spanish that waters these fields still in vegetables and whatnot of crops in New Mexico. And so there was a acequia, this water running along this road. And this particular road, which was called Route 84B and ended on from El Rancho, which is the colonized name, to the San Ildefonso Pueblo, which is the indigenous name. Um, and each animal that I would see on the road, and I had had a phobia about snakes, but snakes appeared to me there. And I started for the first time in my life to be able to have a relationship with them. Um, and a kind of and a psychic relationship where I was able to talk to them and they were responsive. Lizards on the road, coyotes out there, of course, which are all around. Um, but the road itself, like the road as an entity, was teaching me and teaching me things that I now call as above, so below walking, crossroads walking, and all of these things became writing practices. And um, speaking my story aloud and starting to teach people to speak the story aloud as well as write it and be able to compare and contrast where their most natural writer's voice is. Because through an indigenous lens, of course, speaking came before writing and not being able to write in a certain way, in a kind of way that is really celebrated in colonialism and and a white supremacist and patriarchal culture, where I started to work with really and address. And actually, for myself, I started out as a solo performer, writing my shows by storytelling, by telling them aloud first and then polishing them. So, what does it have to do with ancestors as well? When in this culture, where our minds and our bodies have been colonized, where there's been suppression and shaming for our natural beings, our natural selves, particularly women, femmes, queer people, black people, brown people, of all kinds, indigenous people, disabled people, right? Anybody who's not the white cisgender hetero norm, and white also cut off from their culture, for there are some people, so-called white people, who are still connected or reconnecting with original indigenous cultures in Europe. But if you're not any of those people, right, our authentic voices have been silenced, suppressed. Like I said, shame is a big one. Shame is so thick. It makes us feel and believe that anything we want to share, right, is essentially wrong. So the way I was taught through my body and through this road tied in really perfectly with ancestral constellation work I'd been doing at that point for about 10 or 12 years. And I'd been doing the Hellinger work, which comes out of Germany, ostensibly in Bert Hellinger, but honestly, it was colonized by him. It was a great gift that it came into the Western world, but it's indigenous work. The work came out of the fact that he lived with the Zulu people for 13 years in South Africa, and that's where the work came from, because it is all of this, anything, the so-called somatics, is an indigenous practice, and it's been held for us, this ancestral practice, by indigenous cultures all over the world, or in colonization through our bloodlines, those of us who are from colonizer bloodlines, or from those of us who are from bloodlines who have been colonized, or for some of us, and um, this is a very common thing, where one has both, right? And both sides. Um, the ancestral piece was just uh, burnt out of us. And I mean, literally, which is the number thing, one reason in terms of the accusation in Europe, in Scotland, and England. Why is this person being accused of being a witch? It was talking to the dead. It was talking to her ancestors. And of course, that practice had to be terrorized out of us, because it's so powerful. When we come into direct contact and relationship with our ancestors, and by that, and not just the bloodlines, the human ancestors in our bloodlines, the milk lines, which are not bloodlines, but people who we were close to, who really loved us, supported us on our path, as well as the mighty dead, those who are more collective ancestors, writers, musicians, often people who have become so much larger than their own individual selves and are in their lifetimes in service to the collective, and non-human ancestors, including land spirits, river spirits, um, land itself. Um, all when we come into the aliveness in our relationship, in the family of things, in the family of all, uh, we have access to our power. And we have access in that ancestral remembrance. So when we have full ancestral remembrance, and when we really come into an embodied relationship and embodied memory, things return, including stories and memories from past lives and future lifetimes, stories, memories, and relationship. Um, with the land, with ley lines and song lines. All of these things open up inside of us. And in terms of the way we are able to write, we are able to write in a stronger way or speak our stories aloud in a stronger way, because all of a sudden we've been given access to so many more levels of stories in ourselves, in the plants and trees around us, in the land around us, in the river and the water around us, in an expanded sense of ancestors beyond simply the biological line of mom and dad. We sometimes are opening to foster lines and adoptive lines. And also calling in the mighty dead changes everything, because it's like in this world of ego, right? There's a sense of separation, and these people are here, and maybe we're here, and there's no access. When we start to work with the mighty dead as ancestors, we find how available everyone and everything is to us. And I think about the church, and the Catholic Church, and in particular, that one has to go through a priest, or an Orthodox church or Orthodox religion of any kind. One has to go through the human, the male human, to access the relationship with God, the deity, the Christ, however you want to phrase it, versus when we are in this deep animist relationship with everyone and everything, the relationships, whether with Buddha or Christ, or Muhammad or whomever become very available and very personal, one also starts to realize that there is more than one path, as some of those religions teach, because if you have the embodied experience of starting to have relationship with all these different beings, spirits, again, human and non-human, it radically shifts your point of view, not to take away from anyone or everything, but rather than to add to and expand. So, of course, with this kind of animist perspective on the world, and literally from your own relationship with your body, your relationship with your ancestors, and your relationship to particular types or pieces of land or places that have particular charge or deep meaning or connection for you, often you and your people, um, what is coming through you as a writer and storyteller um, is more interesting. It's more compelling because you're more compelling, because you've opened to more. And that more puts you on your own unique trajectory towards bringing through the story that only you can tell from the perspective of an untethered voice and um, I want to use the word retrieval. I'm not sure in what capacity, but there's a kind of retrieving of your gifts in this process, a retrieving of your relationships, a retrieving once again in, as Mary Oliver, mentioned, your place in the family of things. So somatic writing is devoted to supporting you in expanding your connections in the universe, your connections to ancestors, to land, towards other humans, towards plant kingdoms, to your relationship with trees. It's infinite. And the way it occurs in the writing is to actually come into dialogue and open and allow these energies to speak to you and through you, and to allow them to write to you and through you. And part of this retrieval process is the deep listening and listening to what's most relevant to you, what's most alive to you, what has the greatest charge to you. And this helps you follow and track writing the book that has the greatest possibility of landing with others, landing deeply, because it is really coming from a coherent and embodied, human embodied soul. I'm going to be doing some more videos on somatic writing, but I hope this one was helpful for you, particularly if you're sitting down to write your book or to write anything and are wanting to go deeper and open up places and stories that perhaps you haven't opened up to through writing before.